This is the ESG 101, Why It Matters for Supply Chain panel. My name is Lauren Loew. I am a litigation partner at Foley and Lardner, specializing in supply chain disputes, of which I hope all of you have none. I'm joined by 4 panelists today to speak about the issues on this panel. I will briefly introduce them and then go through and ask them to introduce themselves and their companies. First is Jenna Kunde, from the Director of Global Sustainability from Johnson Controls, Inc. Cathy Pieters, the Senior Director of Sustainable Ingredients in Cocoa Life from Mondelez International, Inc. Paul Renberg, Senior Counsel of EHSS and Real Estate and Senior Director of EHSS at Dana Incorporated. And Pete Tomasi, my colleague at Foley and Lardner, an environmental attorney. So Jenna, if you would please just introduce yourself, your background in sustainability, and just briefly about JCI.
Sure. So my name is Jenna Kunde. I am the Global Sustainability Director at Johnson Controls. Johnson Controls is a large organization around the world, about 100,000 employees in more than 150 countries. It focuses on buildings. So, and really more and more of a focus around helping our customers decarbonize their buildings. So it's a lot about building systems. So heating, ventilating, air conditioning, controls, security, fire, and all of the kind of IT to help buildings be more energy efficient. So that is some of what we do. And me, thank you.
Thanks, Jenna. I'll turn it to Cathy next.
Sure, yes, thanks for having me. So my name is Cathy Pieters. I am responsible for sustainable ingredients within Mondelez International. Mondelez International is actually, the headquarters is based in Chicago. We're a publicly traded global snacking company. You probably know us from brands like Oreo, Belvita, Triscuits maybe, or the chocolates Cadbury, Milka, Toblerone if you travel, or Tang, Trident, Halls. So that's a little bit, our snacking environment. We are on a mission to lead the future of snacking around the world by offering the right snack for the right moment, made the right way. So that's a little bit what our vision and mission is about. We're about 27 billion net revenue, 80,000 people across equally 150 countries. And yeah, I am based in Switzerland. I'm Belgian really, so if you detect a little accent, that is normal. And I will hand it over back to you, Lauren.
Thank you. Paul, you're up next.
Hello, my name is Paul Renberg. I am the lead environmental health and safety person within Dana. I'm a member of our sustainability cross-functional leadership team. We've been on our journey for a while here, but Dana has been a traditional automotive supplier with power conveyance. We are making a substantial change in our driveline portfolio, going from traditional internal combustion engine conveyance to electricity, and that's a big part of what we're doing as we move forward. We are in about 35 countries globally and are about 9 billion in sales.
Thank you, Paul. And Pete.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm Pete Tomasi, counsel with Foley and Lardner. Like Paul, I have spent much of my career initially focusing on environmental matters, and especially working with the electric power industry and several other industries, traditional fossil and energy intensive industries. And in the past decade, they have transitioned, and our focus has transitioned simply from beyond environmental compliance to engagement more generally on climate change, on sustainability issues, on reducing environmental impacts as public clients and as the marketplace has really shifted its focus to renewable energy projects to finding, engaging in developing green attributes and doing things like carbon offsetting, plastics offsets more recently. So my practice is, I think, now more broadly focused on sustainability, and I like to think that I start out as on the environmental side, but touch on a number of all three of the components of the ESG topic.
Thanks, Pete. So we're here today to talk about the environmental, social, and governance reporting, which is not necessarily the most exciting topic to all supply chain participants and executives, but it's, I think, a really important part of supply chain, especially going into the future. So we'll start with just briefly describing ESG and ESG reporting to set the stage for the rest of the conversation. So Pete, can you just give us a little introduction into what is ESG?
So the ES and G are environmental, social, and governance. And this is a collection of components that a number of large investment advisors, and most recently a very well capitalized entity, a very well known entity named BlackRock, have really focused on in engagement with companies. So these are the criteria. Environmental encompasses both the nuts and bolts, emissions, effluent, discharge, waste, but more globally a focus on how are companies planning to address climate change. And Jenna and Cathy really have a much more, and Paul all have some somewhat more granular analysis of the scenarios that they look at. But from a climate change standpoint, as we enter a world that we're living in today with changing temperature regimes, how are companies planning to be more resilient? On the social side, just so in the last decade or so, there are legal requirements that a number of companies are dealing with. The UK Anti-Slavery Act, California and other states have specific requirements both for disclosures related to social involvement, as well as really crossing over to governance, which is how are boards of directors composed and how engaged are boards of directors. And sort of the concept of ESG is, are companies actually looking at the environmental impacts of their work, of their products, of their services? Are they looking at the social impacts? How are they treating people? And is management truly engaged on these matters? Do you have someone identified, or have is consideration of these matters actually being put before the board, or the boards of directors where the proverbial buck stops on issues related to the social and environmental matters? And are they truly engaged? Is there a governance function there where they're looking at how will we engage on climate change? They're looking at thinking about how do we treat people?
Thanks, Pete. So in your organizations, I'll ask the rest of the panel and start with Jenna. Who is interested in the ESG information that you are, gathering, reporting, tracking?
Yeah, so we have found really an increased interest and a increasingly more sophisticated interest by our investors, right? So sustainability reporting has kind of gone from, tell your story, more of a marketing thing, to really finance, right? So they're really looking at what are your risks? What are your opportunities around environmental, social governance? So we have been really engaged a lot with our investors on that, but also our customers are really interested in what we can deliver around environmental, social, and governance, but especially environmental decarbonizing their operations. So and so we see that, but another thing that I find wonderful is our employees. So we're finding increasingly employees will come to an organization because it has a strong sustainability reputation, and then they'll stay there because they really do have the ability to, in their day-to-day work, affect the sustainability of the organization. So those are just a few of the stakeholders that we have seen an increased engagement in the last few years.
Thanks. Cathy, what has been your experience at Mondelez?
Yeah, Jenna, just very similar on the investment side. Our board has also elevated. We used to have a specific governance for ESG separate from the board, but now the board has really asked to put it on the plenary agenda. So there's definitely a similar vibe and a similar increasing interest related to ESG and sustainability. Interestingly, we also, so we're a consumer facing company, and most of our products are sold, if they're not sold on e-commerce, they're sold in retailers. And the retailers are also very much stepping up their requirements and engaging with us on different platforms on our ESG, not necessarily reporting, but on the activities and the commitments we have. The consumers are the end users of our products, and we know that they are quite becoming much more aware and probably requiring or asking or expecting from their favorite brands that we are, you know, conducting responsible business. It's interesting to see that we don't necessarily then see that translated into the buying act. People are not necessarily going to spend more on sustainable products. But yeah, I would add maybe the more retailer customer side and the consumer side.
Thanks. And Paul, have you seen any other areas that in your company or externally that have been interested in ESG information?
Yeah, our customers are typically an automaker, a vehicle maker, things of that nature. One of the things we are seeing, I think, which is kind of new in the industry, is a much longer looking issue with customers where they're wanting carbon neutrality in a platform. So if you're supplying a certain component, you're going to have to demonstrate how you are meeting their objectives. So you're part of their objectives, not just having your own objectives. So that is something in addition to everything else that the two previously have mentioned. So.
And these are a lot of different interested parties and stakeholders in the process with very different kind of approaches and backgrounds. So who, on a day-to-day basis, how are you engaging, and who in your company is engaging with your sustainability team? I'll start with Cathy on this one.
Everybody. No, that is not completely true. I must say that we say ESG, but when we say ESG at Mondelez, we really think about sustainability and well-being. So it's really looking at the sustainability of our products, the ingredients, the packaging, and all of that, but also the products that we put on the market. Are they, portion controlled? Do we have, the appropriate? So the well-being part is included in that. And I would say it has become fully embedded in our business strategy. And so that's why I was saying everybody. But it is true that if you look at our leadership team, the strategy is really designed and driven by what we call our impact team, which is basically part of the CLA function, which is the corporate and legal affairs function. Yet we look at ourselves as the function agnostic team, because we really work with all the different functions in the company, to make the things happen, because it needs to happen with our suppliers. It needs to plan for with finance. Our marketing teams need to understand the proof points we can bring to them. I mean, it's really very much cross-functional, but we do have a dedicated sustainability team with an impact. And we actually do have a dedicated ESG reporting person who really tries to streamline everything, because as some of you may have experience with, I don't know, but at least for a traded company, there's a lot of requirements on ESG reporting, and we're really trying to bring it together in one person. So strategy delivered by a dedicated team and followed up, and the implementation then happens, within the different functions of Mondelez. Actually interesting to know that all of Mondelez leaders have sustainability goals in their personal goals. So basically their bonuses are depending on it. And that then also trickles down into their organizations, just to show how embedded it is now in the business.
And Jenna, I seem to recall you mentioning kind of that tie into executive compensation as well.
Yeah, I'll second what you said, Cathy, just in terms of, so first of all, and I know you both talked about how it's really been, sustainability has really been elevated in the company. So what used to be our board governance committee is now our board governance and sustainability committee. And then we have our chief sustainability officer now. And she reports directly to the board of directors and our executive team. And our executives do, including our CEO, have their compensation is tied to reaching our sustainability goals. Also, we have 3 now types of sustainable finance agreements that are out in the market. And those are also tied to us achieving our sustainability goals. And then finally, I'll talk about disclosure. So folks may have heard that the SEC, that the EU government is looking at sustainability reporting and actually looking to require that within our regular, annual reporting requirements. And so that's coming. And so we're working with our audit team, and we're working with our, the team that does the SEC reporting, which we have worked with them for a while because we're, Johnson Controls is an Irish company. So we're actually required to do what's called a non-financial report, which goes out alongside our, other annual meeting materials, but talks about our impact on environment, social governance. So it's really been our sustainability goals, our sustainability commitments, our sustainability governance has really been elevated in the company to the board and executive level.
Thanks, Jenna. And Paul, any other areas that are blowing up your phone every day?
Well, again, with the government's committee, we also have a sustainability and technology governance committee that drives a lot of what we do. A couple other areas which they haven't been, purchasing. The supply chain down below us is something that's, is something that we work a lot with globally. Obviously, with the challenges of COVID and transportation have only added to the discussion as to, how do you shorten your supply chain? How do you make it, more robust? And then one other group that we deal with, which may sound a little interesting, is our sales team. It is something in our business to when you're a leader to be able to show what you've done and use it as a tool in marketing. So that is another group which we make sure that we have a consistent message and that they have the right information. But it's a team which I was surprised that we would spend that much time with. So.
Thank you. So next, we're going to turn to kind of ESG reporting and frameworks for a brief discussion on this. So each of your companies are public companies, and people can log on to your website and pull up the glossy kind of 60-page brochure that talks about all of the ESG work and presents it in a certain way. But there are myriad different frameworks and reporting structures that companies can follow. So I wanted to ask Jenna kind of to briefly describe, JCI's approach on this and evolution, what frameworks you guys are using.
Sure. So at Johnson Controls, we've been reporting for a long time. We've been reporting since 2002, and we do respond to many of the large surveys. So on a supply chain side, EcoVadis is a big one. The S&P corporate sustainability assessment used to be run by Robico Sam that informs the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. But we put out 4 major reports each year. So one, I mentioned that non-financial report, which we're required to put out alongside our other annual meeting materials. The second is our annual sustainability report, right? Lots of people do that. Ours is aligned to GRI, but also SASB. So we're a SASB reporter. And then we also try to integrate and align to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So which of those are we driving with our work? So that sustainability report kind of touches on several different things. We also put out our UN Global Compact annual communication on progress. So that's around kind of, we talked about human rights and labor and making sure that we are looking at our supply chain, making sure that that is being responsibly handled, that we don't conflict minerals, and all these types of things. And then finally, CDP, which is a lot of work and is aligned to TCFD. And so for that, though, and I mean, that's been really helpful in our organization. We do a climate risks and opportunities analysis with our senior leadership. And so that they're really able to see, as we go forward in time here, what does a 2-degree world look like? What does a 1.5-degree world look like? And what are our risks within that? And what are our opportunities? So it was really out of some of that work that we saw this, secular trend of decarbonization of buildings, right? That all these customers want to decarbonize their buildings. And we thought, not only is that a risk if the world doesn't do that, but that's a business opportunity, frankly, for Johnson Controls to help companies do that. So those are kind of our major reports. And then I'll just say finally, yes, we've been doing this for a long time, but we are still learning too. There's, scope 3 is still a little bit of a Wild West in the world where, we think we're doing a pretty good job of figuring it out, but it is pretty new to try to figure that out. And we have been looking at that for several years, but we're expanding our view now to what are those important areas outside of our walls? What do we really need to hunker down on and focus on? And that's, I'll just say that working with others is really important because it is something that everyone is kind of figuring out right now in this moment in history.
And Paul, I guess I'll ask you, there are many reporting frameworks and organizations and grading structures. Do they all have the same questions that they're looking for the answers to?
I think everyone knows the answer to that question. They may have a similar question, but obviously some have a different focus and a different bent. And we joke about the subparts to subparts to subparts because each one is a bit different. Key to any of this is really keeping an inventory of your answers, being able to use the same database for your information. I think that's very key. There is going to continue to be more and more database reporting. There's going to be more and more things you're going to have to track. And so, being organized as to how you gather your information and keep it is very key. It's just going to be a challenge, but you just have to bear down and kind of start building the base. So.
And how does Dana decide which of these frameworks or reporting organizations to go, to go through or to use?
It's a back and forth discussion, really up and down our leadership team, as well as with your investment community. BlackRock, as mentioned earlier, is a substantial investor in Dana, so your investors are going to determine a lot of what you do. The people you are involved with, your customers are going to determine a lot of what you do, and then you really have to have leadership within your group as to determine what's important to you and what are you going to do. It's very difficult. You can't do everything. You have to determine what's important to you and what does your company believe is their path forward and focus on those items.
And Pete, I'll ask you for kind of the reporting and how it's evolving. Do you see in the future there being more of a centralized or a few centralized organizations rather than the number of different organizations that we have now?
I think that's the goal, Lauren. And I think that there are really two things driving us towards that. The first is that the the big four accounting firms earlier in 2020, and we were all fairly busy with other things in 2020. But the big four accounting firms, along with worked with the International Business Council standards to put together their own sort of consolidated set of reporting metrics, with the idea that these were the things that the accounting firms thought, this is what, to distilling down sort of, in theory, the best components from the various frameworks that all of our speakers have been working with, to try to get on an even playing field. I don't think that many companies have embraced those standards yet. At the same time, at least in the United States, so the EU has been pushing forward and mandating reporting. The United States, the SEC, recently put out a letter on September 29th, issued an open letter to corporations, sort of foreshadowing there are no standards issued by the SEC for public companies yet. But the SEC basically is pushing companies to start including anything that companies determine to be material or potentially material in their sustainability reports, to start including that and moving that over into existing disclosures like annual reports, 10Ks. So I think that we probably are going to see a combination of a standardization driven by private companies and accountants to try to come up with a more common metric. And SASB already has, I think, a pretty good framework, at least a working framework, that's been adopted by BlackRock along with TCFD. So we're moving down that path, and there seems to be some consolidation in my view. And I think the public company push by the SEC also is going to, I think, encourage that in the US, and ultimately, I think the EU and the US will need to come up with some kind of harmonized standards or not. But I do think, yes, there's a drive towards both. Those two factors seem to be driving us towards something more standardized than what we have right now.
Thanks, Pete. So we'll turn now to kind of the business case for your company's commitment to sustainability and how that intersects with the supply chain. So I'm going to start with Cathy, because Cathy, you have such a rich background with the Cocoa Life program. If you wouldn't mind just briefly kind of describing that for those that are watching, and describing, what is driving that commitment to sustainability at Mondelez?
Sure, yes, absolutely. And maybe the world, so we started the Cocoa Life program, and I actually started in the whole sustainability space like 11 years ago. And so we didn't really wait for regulation to come our way, or even, the world has evolved very fast over the last, we've been on a journey. When we started, there was not as much interest in sustainability as there is today, leave alone, the interest of retailers or consumers, and even the regulating bodies. So what drove us was probably two things. Our company's purpose, because if you have a purpose that you really want to live, that is to empower people to snack right, and the translation of that is proposing the right snack at the right moment, made the right way, then you need to think through what that means in your business strategy. But I think it also came together with the understanding that we can't really have a sustained growth path on a weak supply chain. And because cocoa is so important for us, we did do a footprint exercise to really understand where do we as a company have the biggest impact, because that's where we can then focus on creating the biggest impact as well and help the transformation happen. And definitely our raw materials are almost 75% of our carbon footprint. And within that, cocoa is one of the biggest by far drivers. So that's why we started looking at, okay, how does that, we actually opened and brought transparency into that supply chain. It used to be a very opaque piece of work, like we source cocoa and then we use the cocoa. but we didn't really know what was happening behind. So once we started looking into our supply chain, we could also identify the challenges. And that's where we also understood, okay, there is actually, we understand now why that supply chain is so weak, because we saw challenges as poverty, and poverty then lead to environmental challenges like deforestation. And we also saw some human rights tensions there with child labor happening. So all of that became more visible for us, and that decided us to go, to really step up, go invest in building a sustainably sourced cocoa supply chain. So we started back in 2012, end of 2012. That was the time, actually, I don't know if some of you remember, but when you thought about sustainability, the only tool you really had in the toolbox was certification schemes, like voluntary certification schemes. So basically, you outsource your sustainability by buying at a premium certified products. But when we analyzed all of that, and being the business that we were, we didn't find that that gave us enough insight in the impact of our investment. And so we started applying some business principles and set up a system or an approach, which is called Cocoa Life. That's our program, that is really looking at, in a holistic way, at tackling the root causes of those challenges, and then measure the impact of the investments that we're making. Which was interesting at the time. It was quite pioneering. I think a lot of people were looking at us, but we're 9 years in. Almost 70% of all of our global chocolate is sourced from the program, and we're very proud to see that we're actually creating a positive impact. We're working with almost 200,000 cocoa farmers across the 6 origins that we operate in, or that we source our cocoa from. And of course, I mean, we are chocolate makers, so we needed to work in partnership. Partnership has been like a guiding principle for us when we set up the program. So on the ground, we have people on the ground, but we really operate this whole program working with the producing governments, because basically, that's where we can embed some of the changes for sustainability. But we also work with our suppliers on the ground. And so we embedded some of the practices in our supplier agreements, but then also work with NGO partners on the ground to work on the transformation that needs to happen. So basically, the program is really bringing together, the social, the environmental, and the economical areas of sustainability. So working towards sustainable cocoa farming businesses. Those farmers should be living in empowered cocoa communities, and then all of that underpinned with the area of conserved and restored forests. So that's, we've been on that journey, working with our partners, working with external advisors, and bringing our business on board of all of that evolution. But what happened is that we started bringing in a lot more sustainability expertise in the company, and that's why we've then increased our efforts and move way beyond cocoa. We have a great program on wheat as well, because we're bakers, so wheat is for us very important. But then of course we have like a whole bunch of sustainability requirements on palm oil, hazelnuts, dairy, and all the other ingredients we source. But it all was really rooted in the very intense journey where we have been very hands-on on cocoa, because that is our biggest commodity. And so we definitely want to be leading in that space. Oh, you're on mute, I think.
I'm going to leave just a few minutes at the end for questions, because I know we have had a few questions come in, and hopefully we'll get to those at the very end. But thank you, Cathy, for that insight into your approach to this, and how Mondelez has kind of evolved over time in their approach. Paul, go ahead, please, Cathy.
Really quickly, because I think there's something I forgot to say. From day one, when we pulled Cocoa Life together, we governed it internally through a cross-functional steerco. So we had high leaders from all the functions, procurement, finance, CGA, and so everybody was carrying the program together. And we also had like a mirroring board of external advisors who helped us, remain realistic vis-a-vis what is happening outside of Mondelez. But so having that steering committee with all the functions together carrying the program was a game changer, I think. Anyway, I'll hold here.
And Paul, at your company at Dana, what are you guys seeing as maybe business opportunities or business drivers on the case for Dana's commitment to sustainability?
Well, I mean, I think it goes, one of the things, when you start talking about what are your priorities, one of the things that's very important, I think, to any company is to do a materiality assessment. It's part of the process of defining what's important to you, your stakeholders, and who's the stakeholder is also something you really have to think about as to who has a say in your company. That's what starts driving what's important to your company. It can be technology, it can be supply chain. For surprising for us is that some of our environmental reporting we thought would be really high on the scorecard, and it ended up being important, but not as high as we thought. A lot of it was on innovation, changing our product line, of modernizing, and looking at the future of what we do. There's, as I've mentioned with our team before, this requires leadership involvement at the highest level. We all know if leadership doesn't drive or it doesn't view this as an importance, you're going to have a real tough time pushing that. We've been fortunate with our current leadership that they've really been strong in this area, and it's really been able to, it's really allowed us to really reach out into various areas of our company and make changes and be thing. As we talked about differentiating, I mean, it's tough because it's ever changing, right? So we all know as soon as you achieve one goal here, you look and there's 20 more behind you. So it's ever changing. I mean, I think the latest push for a lot of people is with regards to reducing their carbon footprint, and you're going to hear discussions about net zero and how are you going to get there, and a lot of effort. It's easy to put a goal out there. The next step in saying how are you going to get there in developing that roadmap, and really it's a big challenge to fill out that roadmap and do all the work that is required. So especially when you're global companies, because if you had one country to deal with, I think we'd all say much easier task. But when you start dealing with the restrictions and the various energy inputs around the world, it makes it much more challenging.
And Jenna, this business case kind of for sustainability seems to fit right into the core of JCI's business, helping others and achieve those goals. So how has that business case kind of developed or evolved at JCI?
Sure. So first of all, just here on Paul's comments and Cathy's comments, absolutely the materiality assessment, absolutely just everything you were saying, Paul, around focus, and then, partnership, Cathy, and the importance there. So, but in terms of the business case at Johnson Controls, so that has been a pretty exciting shift in the last few years at Johnson Controls. So, we've done a lot with ESG reporting, and we've done a lot with, our operational work. We have, lots of LEED Platinum buildings, and we have, manufacturing facilities that are wind powered, and 26, I think, zero landfill manufacturing facilities now, and that kind of thing. But the shift is really looking at our customers and looking at this whole trend, again, of decarbonization, and really looking at the fact that lots of governments, lots of companies like yours, Paul and Cathy, are setting these goals, and everybody's trying to figure out that roadmap, right? So totally agree in terms of, Paula, some of your comments about, what is that roadmap? How are we going to get there? What is that going to look like? We're looking at that, forward looking, but also we're looking at that as just this huge business opportunity for us, because we have this, we do building efficiency services. So now we're providing net zero as a service. So if a customer wants to have their building be net zero, we will provide net zero as a service, and the whole thing around decarbonization. And we had a investor day recently, and Johnson Controls, standing and all these things got much stronger because our investors, we talked about the BlackRocks, we talked about these others. You see the engine number one work, right, that's happening. They also see these secular trends around decarbonization, around net zero, around all that as being huge business drivers. And so we want to be out there in front, part of that, making that positive difference with partners, with other companies for our customers. So yeah, it's a huge new world out here, and it's going to be fun. We're hiring, I think, like 11 new people on this one team, all of whose job has sustainability in it somewhere. So those that are listening, if you're interested in sustainability and helping help other customers drive net zero, that's the kind of thing where we're growing our investment and R&D. So we have also committed, this is the last thing I'll say, 75% at least of our research and development expense we've committed to be aligned to sustainability. So again, part of where we're going, we see that as our great potential for growth. So.
Thanks, Jenna. So I want to give a few minutes here for some of your takeaways for people who may be watching this or watching this later, and they are trying to figure out how they can implement some of this at their own companies. It can be really quite daunting. So all three of you and Pete, as an outside advisor, have gone through this process. What would be your high level advice and takeaways for people that are watching this as to how to approach ESG reporting and making it a part of the business culture? And I'm going to start with Paul on this.
I've stated before, management support is number one. You have to have buy-in. Number two, and this is something, the data gathering within a company, most of your companies are doing a lot of good things that corporate doesn't know about. We have a lot of good people around the world that we employ, and they just do good things in their communities. And it's important to recognize and replicate those programs wherever you can. So those are very good. Building a cross-functional team in your management and your leadership, you have to have involvement in many different areas. So that's very important. And you just have to get started. Everyone's done their first report. We've all done our first report, and you just do it and you move on, and it's going to continue to get better every year. It's just a matter of taking that first step. So.
And Jenna, I guess what would be some of your kind of thoughts and takeaways for folks based on your learnings at Johnson Controls?
So I think first I'll use a word that I heard a couple times here today, which is journey. It really is a journey. So just be aware of that, and I guess don't worry too much. So there's a lot to learn. I think that's the second thing, is that we're looking at so we have an approved science-based targets, but what is a net zero science-based target? We're just, all trying to figure that out. So what are those SEC requirements that Pete referred going to be? What are those EU requirements? So just staying on top of that, continuing to learn, and knowing that it is a journey that we're all on, and we're all learning together, and and having that, that leadership support, certainly from the top, from the board, from your executive team, and integrating sustainability into your company. Those are, I would say, some of the, things to be sure to do that in terms of a successful program, getting that high level support, integrating sustainability into the company, its culture, the different functional areas. So.
And that's great advice. And Pete, you've been working with companies on their ESG reporting. What are some things that you've seen, maybe pitfalls to avoid as companies do this? And yeah.
To echo something that Paul said, you have to get through the first report when you're actually doing reporting. And it can be daunting. We have 3, I guess I'd consider best in class public companies reporting, very sophisticated, lots of analysis, lots of experience. And entities that we've worked with, sometimes you end up with paralysis by analysis. You just have to move past that. I think the other piece is that companies, and sort of a critical learning is, companies sometimes feel pressed to make commitments that they're not prepared for or they don't understand. And that is sort of the value that we come in, especially with an environmental or SEC background, to understand. If you commit to that, you will not be able to engage in any M&A, for example. Those are the things that commitments sound good. There can be pressure at the board level. Well-meaning people can almost get locked into very risky decisions, especially when they're not as sophisticated and don't have sort of the depth of the others, the people who are reporting on our panel.
And Cathy, I guess where do you see this going next, and what are some of your takeaways based on the learnings that you've had so far? You've touched on some of them today, but I know you've talked a lot in the past about collaboration.
Yeah, no, definitely. And many of the things have been said. I do want to add, Pete, to what you were saying. One of the key things for me is to not think about ESG in a reactive mode as something you have to do, but really try to connect it, give it purpose, try to connect it to the company purpose, or if you don't have a company purpose, create one, so that you can find your North Star and you can do things on your terms, because it will be much easier to get the whole company aligned, and you will go faster probably. So that's a big thing for me. I think it's also important to bring the outside world in, because you can very quickly, within the company, be very happy with what you're doing, but actually miss a train or miss an information or miss an expertise that has just come out. So creating kind of a little bit of an external advisory board, or people who help you find your North Star or implement the programs, that's really helpful as well. And then the big thing, and that's maybe because I'm so heavily in cocoa and the challenges there are so systemic, no one company can have the impact that or can be responsible for the transformation that's needed. So build coalitions, join coalitions, partner within the sector, because you have similar challenges, or even cross-sector, because sometimes the areas that you operate in, there's different sectors that are active, and on the landscape level you can achieve maybe more. But definitely there's this African proverb that says, I always keep that in mind, it says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think if you want to really embed sustainability at a large scale, you have to hold hands with peers and different actors in the value chain.
Thanks, Cathy. So we had just a couple questions, and I'll just ask 2. So the first one, there was a question from the audience about how your companies sell net zero as an opportunity to advance renewable development instead of just buying carbon offsets. And we had talked amongst ourselves about not getting too far into carbon offsets because it's very complicated. But do any of the panelists have any thoughts about that? Not as much. I would say that it's pretty complicated area. So
Well, but I
yeah,
have a
go ahead,
question. Sell,
Cathy.
sell to who? Sell internally?
I think it looks to me like this is externally focused. So how is your company, for example, Paul, you talked about helping some of your customers to reach some of their goals, sustainability goals, or reduction.
Part of it, it's product. We're going from a traditional internal combustion engine powered product to an electrified product, to changing, the power stream. For us, we start looking at, sustainability and energy consumption. We are looking at, virtual power purchase agreements. We're looking at on-site, alternative energy production. We have not gone down the path of purchasing offsets. And I think most people understand that market is all over the place. So it's a tough strategy to follow that market. I think if depending on your situation, it might work, but I don't know if that's a long-term solution for some people.
Thank you, Paul. And then one last question, and then we'll wrap up. And this is to Cathy. There was a question from the audience about the use of certifications or company development programs like Cocoa Life, and if you have a view as to which one will surpass the other, or if both, certifications and company proprietary programs will cohabitate in the market.
I think they can totally cohabitate. A certification scheme, what it really does is provide a certificate that someone is complying with a certain standard. And that's good and easy to compare, but that is not necessarily going to create the behavioral transformation that is needed on the ground. And so it's very difficult to then really understand the impact. It's also difficult for just a compliancy to a standards mechanism to really tackle the root causes of things. And as long as you don't tackle the root causes, it's difficult to sustain the transformation. And so I'm looking at things like, yes, there could be kind of a basic form of standardization. I'm not sure that should be a voluntary one. I think it also makes sense for producing countries, for example, to have kind of a minimum standard. If you want to be talking about sustainably sourced products, then this needs to be true. I think that can also be, I'm also quite happy that the EU and other governments are looking at regulation on environmental and human rights due diligence, because that will also level the playing field and make sure that there is a minimum that everybody just needs to adhere to. That all makes sense, but I'm not sure that will be enough to see the genuine transformation that some supply chains that are very challenged are really going to be needing.
Thank you. And that's a great note to end on. So I want to thank all of our panelists for your time preparing for this, your insights today, and your leadership in this field, and give our participants an opportunity to move over to the next meeting and log on to that. So thank you all for your time today.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.